Welcome to the first video of the intermediate Playwright test automation tutorials. In this one, I'm going to be covering all the intermediate topics in a more advanced way. So if you haven't already watched the previous version, which is the basic tutorials that I created, a set of 8 videos, I would advise you to go and watch them first. This video is about locators. Locators are a way of finding things on a page. Now imagine if I ask you to find something, how would you locate something? You would just point to that element and you'd say, there it is. But Playwright is an automation framework and it has got its own way of finding things. And I will be talking about those ways of finding things on a web page in this video. I also had a chat with the Playwright team in order to understand what is the best practice of using locators, because not all locators are great locators. Think of it from maintenance point of view, scalability point of view. If you're using a multilingual application, how would that work? Is using test IDs the best practice? Is using selectors the best practice? So we'll find all of that in this video. So let's get started. Locators. So let's start by understanding what they are. So according to the Playwright documentation, they are a central piece of Playwright's automating and retry ability, and they represent a way of finding elements on the page. As a human, how do you find elements on the page? You can see the whole page in front of you. If I ask you, where do you see search bar? You would say, here, I can see the search bar over here. So for you, it was very straightforward to locate things. But what about Playwright? Playwright is an automation framework. Now, if you're coming from any other framework like Selenium or Puppeteer or Cypress, you might have an idea of like how we can find or locate things. And let's start with that, and then we'll come back to the way Playwright recommends things, because I have had conversations with some of the Playwright developers and they have recommended certain way of doing things, although they say that we are not enforcing our ways on you, so you are completely open to picking your own approach depending on your own conditions or your scenarios. So if I search for a locator, locate by CSS or XPath, this is what we are normally used to doing things. Like if you're coming from Puppeteer or other world, we're used to locate things using the selectors from CSS selectors or the ID selectors, where each element was decorated with certain selectors and it was easy to just locate them. But the problem with that was it changes with the application, and as we are moving forward, the frameworks are getting more dynamic and they are putting their own selectors. They're creating dynamic selectors within the page. There's shadow DOM as well. So those are the challenges. So what I've done for you is I have built a basic application using Vue.js framework. There is no need to use Vue.js or any other framework. This is only for demonstration purpose so that we can play around with it. And I needed some kind of control over the application while we are running some tests. So that is why I built this basic Hello World app using a very basic Hello World Vue.js wrapper. So what I have done in this Hello World application is I have created a button, a text box, checkboxes, and a link and a link button. Now, what's the difference between a link and a link button? That is something that we will learn in this video. And we will try to use these elements or locate these elements using Playwright, and we'll try to find the best way of locating these elements on the page. So let's get started with this. So what I've done up until now is I have written an import statement where I'm getting the test expect from Playwright, and it is just visiting the page, which is this page. So I'm going to open another tab, and in this tab I'm going to write npx playwright test -UI. So we will be running tests in the UI mode. According to the Playwright documentation, this is a more developer friendly way of running tests, and I agree. I mean, I've tried different approaches. In my previous video, you must have seen that I'm running the whole test and then in the browser, and this is an approach where you're running it just in the UI. So let's see how that works. So it has just opened a Chrome browser for me, and now in here it is loading the Playwright UI, and if it's still loading. So once it's ready, I'll click on play this big play button is for running all the tests that you have got, but because I've got only one test, it doesn't matter if I click play over there or over here. Let's wait for it to load properly. So right now the test is failing because it is not able to launch the browser. That is because I had to delete some cache to make some space for this video. So I'm going to do npm I just to see if there is a way to fix this issue first. So I'm going to delete my node modules completely, and I'm going to do npm I again, and let's see if that would fix the issue. So it is loading. Let's try to run the test. It says that it is failing to load the browser, and that's a completely different issue. So let's see how we can fix this issue. npx playwright test. As you can see, because I deleted my caches, I have accidentally deleted the MS Playwright, which also contained the Firefox nightly build. So what I would need to do is I would need to install the Playwright again using this command, npx playwright install. So if you see this kind of problems, you could just do npx playwright install, and that should sort out your browser related issues. So as you can see, it's now downloading all the browsers that are missing. All right, so now if I run the test UI again, I should be able to run the test, open the browser. There you go. So we can see that same UI that we were seeing earlier, and it is able to go to that page. Now let's try to locate the first element. The first element is the button. So if you're coming from the old world, you would do something like await page.locator, and in here you would say CSS is equal to whatever the CSS of that button is. So let's see, in our case, the CSS of that button is, drumroll, so it's an ID, Uncle Aaroh button. So I'm gonna do hash Uncle Aaroh button. Okay, by the way, if you go to that page, I have added console logs so that I can see things are happening. So if I click on this button, let's see, if I click on this button, you can see it says Uncle Aaroh says it's working, so it's working. So every time I click on it, you can see that it adds the console log. So we should be able to see that in the UI. So to make sure that our test is running, I will do await page.locator, CSS this, and so first you locate things and then you perform a certain action. So the action comes after a dot. So dot, and the action is click. Okay, so I don't need to update anything now. This automatically updates itself. So I'm gonna click on play button and look at the console, and it says Uncle Aaroh says it's working, so it's working. So yep, and you can see a red dot here which says we were able to locate this button. Now that was very interesting, because in the old world we might have done things this way by using an ID and click. How do you do things in Playwright? Now if you look at that button, this button has got, let's see, does it have, if I do inspect element, I'm purposely not going to the application code so that I can share with you like the view that you are normally used to, like going to the browser. So it has also got like an ID and a data test ID. So if I go, so data hyphen test ID is equal to Uncle Aaroh button test ID. So I'm going to go back to the documentation of Playwright and scroll up to the top, And the first locator, the sugar method, according to Quick Guide, these are the recommended built-in locators. So these are all recommended by Playwright, but I will come to the one that is highly recommended in a bit. So let's comment that, and I'm going to write code await page dot. Now my locator was get. Now it does an auto completion, so I can do getByRole. Also get by test ID, and get by test ID is whatever the test ID is. So in our case, the test ID is this. So I'm gonna get by test ID like that. As you can see in the documentation, if you specify data dash test ID, you can use that as a test ID. And then again, dot after the dot, you perform an action. So I'm gonna perform an action after the dot. So dot click. Now if I go back to the UI and I look, previously it was locator hash Uncle Aaroh button. Now it is, if I run it again, get by test ID, and it still works, the red dot, and this is a test ID. I can show you that it breaks if I give a wrong test ID. So it is trying to find an element that doesn't exist, so it will wait for 5 seconds. So I'm not going to wait for 5 seconds. You need to trust me on that one. As you can see, it's still spinning around, so that will fail. So if I fix this, stop this test and play it again, it will pass. So as you can see that we were able to find a button using the test ID. Now, what other ways we can use to find or locate that button? There is like a title attribute. We can look into like what is the title. If we have specified the title in that button, we could potentially use that. That button doesn't have a title, so I'm not going to use that one. Alt text, this is for images. By placeholder, so like you had seen an example of postcode, that's a placeholder. By label, by text. So the reason I'm skipping all of these is, although Playwright is saying they are recommended built-in locators, my videos are slightly opinionated, so I'm not really keen on using either of those. Text changes, label changes, placeholder, that can change. If you have got multiple languages, that might be a challenge to like which placeholder you should use, but there may be a case for doing that. So if you want, just for the purpose of this exercise, I can try out one of these and show you like placeholder and show you how that is working. But it is exactly the same thing. So await page dot get by placeholder, and the placeholder, what is the placeholder for the text box? The placeholder is postcode. So we will just write postcode, and now the action, because it's a text box, you don't click the text box, you fill the text box. You can fill it with the value Uncle Aaroh rocks. Now let's try to run the test, and you can see that it says Uncle Aaroh rocks, and we got that text box using the placeholder value from it. But is that the best practice? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure that it is not. So I'm gonna skip all of these. I will jump directly to the discussion that I had with the Playwright team on the happy hour. So I was asking Max like what's the best way of using the locators. Is like, if I have an option between get by test ID or get by role, which one should I choose? Max responded really well. He said that use get by role. The reason is because it will make your website more accessible. Think of it from screen reader point of view. I didn't get that at that point, so I wanted to understand it a bit more, and I did some research on what the roles are. So if you go to this documentation, which talks about, this is a Mozilla Web Accessibility documentation. This is a really important paragraph that I think we should read. It talks about ARIA roles, which adds the semantic meaning to the content. So if you again think of yourself as a screen reader, how would the website look to you as a screen reader. This again, God has blessed you with amazing eyes, and you can see different colors, you can read all the text, but not everybody is able to do that. So following accessibility guidelines in your website is a really, I think in this day and age, it's a must. So I would definitely ask you to make sure your website is accessible. So you are killing two birds with one stone when you use getByRole. So what does it mean? So in here it talks about semantic elements in HTML. So there are two types of roles. So one is like implicit roles. So let's see if we have got an example of that in here. So yeah, so that is what it says over here. So by default, many semantic elements in HTML have a role. For example, type radio has the radio role, and then there's non-semantic. So semantic elements like button, text box, input radio, they have a role defined by the browser itself. But non-semantic elements like div or span, they don't have any semantics, so they will return a null. So what you can do is you can provide a role attribute, and then you can specify what their role is. So for example, here they are giving an example of unordered list, which has a role tab panel, and then it would be read as a tab panel by the screen readers. So that is really important. Now coming back to our example here, what is the role of this element? You're right, it's button. What about this one? This is a text field. That's what we normally call it. Rather than guessing things, I found a way to identify it, and that is how you can just right click on the element, go to inspect, and then click on the I guess two dots, two arrows on the right, and click on accessibility. This is an amazing feature in the modern browsers. When you go to accessibility, you can see the name and the role. So although I have written text, the role of this thing is a text box, and the name is postcode. So it's a text box with a name postcode. What about this? Let's just do the same thing. Role is checkbox and name is checkbox 111. What about this? Role is checkbox and name is checkbox 222. Okay, now coming to the link versus link button. If I click on link, the role over here is link and name is I'm a link, the text that you see on the top. And if you look at it, this is just a link, right? So and it has a hyperlink reference to hash, and it says I'm a link. What about a link button? So a link button is similar to a link, but it has got a role button. So you might have seen some modern applications using a hyperlink, and then a CSS basically adds like a background and border and rounded shape and makes it work like a CSS button with a really nice styling. So that is basically a link button. So the semantic meaning of this element is a link, but you can change the semantic meaning of an element by adding the attribute role. So the reason I went through all this is because Playwright has got a getByRole functionality. So by default, most web applications are missing this role attribute, or they are not semantic websites. So this practice of using getByRole will help you improve your web application or your production code as well. So let's try to use this example. So getByRole, how do you use it? So in our case, we have got how many buttons on this page? You can see that this is a button, and this is a text box, checkbox, link, and that we have got a link button because the semantic meaning of this element button and this element button is the same. So in the locators, when I do page or getByRole and just specify a button, that won't work because let's try it. I'll show you what happens. await page dot get by role, and if I do button dot click, and if I run the test would fail. And if I go to the error tab, it says resolve to two elements. The first element is a button and second element is a hyperlink with a role button. That's interesting. So how do I select this button? Well, there's a second parameter which is a name. So if I add the name over here and say I want to select Uncle Aaroh, and then I click on it, let's see if that works. There you go. So it did work this time, and it says Uncle Aaroh says it's working, so it's working, and it selected this button. Now if I wanted to select text box, there's only one text box on the page. So can I do text box? Oh, let's first find what the role is. So I'm going to inspect element, accessibility, and the role is text box. So that is how I know the role is text box. And the name of this is postcode. So if I don't specify the name and I type fill hello Uncle Aaroh, play. So it says hello Uncle Aaroh. So it clicked on that button, which is what it was doing, and then it said hello Uncle Aaroh. So that worked. But what if I add another text box? It would be the same thing as what we saw with the button. So it's best if I specify the name. And if you remember, the way we find the name is we look at inspect element, and the name is postcode. So I'm going to copy the name from here. So if I run it again, it will continue working because we haven't made any change. Now there are two checkboxes. So I will do the same for them because there are two checkboxes, await page.get by role. Now, how do I find the role for this? I'm going to do inspect element, accessibility tab again, role is checkbox, name is checkbox 111. So I'll go back to the code. Checkbox is the role, comma, and name is equal to checkbox 111. Now, what action do I need to perform on it? Dot check. So if I run this test again, I should have my first check. Now, if I want to do the same thing for other one, I can do checkbox 222. Because both are checkboxes, so it's just a name that is different. And if I run it again, so we got the two checks, the name, the click on the button, as you can see here. Now, how do I click on the link? So I've also added like a action on this link. So if I click on this, you will see console log. So I'm going to select that link. So link, but this time the link name is like really long. So I'm not going to use the full name. I'm going to use a regex. So if I go back to the Playwright documentation, it says you can use a regex as well. You don't have to worry about writing the full name. So I'm going to type link and click. So let's see what happens if I do link and click. It says link, 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 which is what happens when I click on it. So it says link, link, link. Now the last one, but not the least, it's a link button. So I would have to use the getByRole for button. But it has got the word link in it. So in theory that should work. So let's try it. You can see that the red dot is over there. So it's over here. The console says you clicked a link button. So congratulations. We went through all the major selectors, also major locators in this video. We went and played with getByRole. We tried to look at what we used to do. So that's basically it. That's all I wanted to share today about locators. If you have got any questions, feel free to add a comment below. Great job. Now you know what locators are. And thank you so much for staying with me throughout this video. I know there was an issue with the caches and Playwright browser, but that is how you learn. I didn't want to remove that element from this video because if I had this issue, you might have that issue as well someday. The reason I had this issue was I was using C cleanup to make some space in my computer, and it deleted the caches for MS Playwright. But again, you have learned two things in this video: how to use locators and how to fix the browsers if they get deleted. And don't forget, make sure you understand what ARIA roles are and try to use getByRoles as much as possible. If you can't, then yes, test IDs is your next best bet. So try to use things that are provided by the documentation. Try to stay on the best practices because Playwright team understands what your requirements are. And again, I'm not a representative of the Playwright team. I spoke to them. They said, we are not highly opinionated. It's up to you what works best for you. Use that. But my experience says if you stay with the best practices, there are several advantages. One is the scalability, maintenance, and when the framework evolves, if you're using the best practices, there's less chance that the things that you're using in the code may become legacy. So keep watching because I will be creating more videos on the intermediate topics, and I'm covering all the nitty-gritty of the Playwright framework. So if you have got any questions, please feel free to reach out to me because I would be more than happy to answer. See you in the next video.